Hi, and welcome to the second annual Identity Management Day. My name is Lisa Plagemeyer, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Along with the Identity-Defined Security Alliance, I want to thank you for joining us today. We have an exciting day planned and a full agenda focused on raising awareness, sharing best practices, and inspiring individuals and organizations of all sizes to take action when it comes to effectively managing and securing digital identities. No one is immune from an identity-based cyber attack, regardless of the size of your organization, even SMBs. The repercussions can be significant, as we've seen in the last year. The National Cybersecurity Alliance is a nonprofit on a mission to empower a more secure, interconnected world. Our alliance stands for the safe and secure use of all technology. We build strong partnerships, educate, and inspire all to take action to protect ourselves, our families, our organizations, and nations. You can learn more about us at staysafeonline.org. We've partnered with the IDSA to produce Identity Management Day because as the lines between our personal and professional lives continue to blur, protecting our digital identities as consumers, employees, or partners is essential to security. How important is identity? Verizon's most recent DBIR report states that 61% of all breaches were a result of stolen credentials. According to the IDSA, 79% of organizations have experienced an identity-related security breach in the last 2 years. To tell you a little more about the IDSA and the mission behind Identity Management Day, I would like to welcome IDSA's Executive Director, Julie Smith.
Thanks, Lisa. The NCA has been a fantastic partner and co-host of our second annual Identity Management Day, and we're very grateful for all that they have done to support this initiative. I want to also thank you for joining us today for our Identity Management Day virtual conference. Now in our 4th year, the IDSA has been focused on educating security professionals about the importance of combining identity and security strategies and providing vendor-neutral education and resources to reduce the risk of an identity-related attack. Our membership is comprised of leading identity and security vendors, end user contributors, and companies. All our resources are freely available at idsalliance.org and are eligible for ISC squared CPE credits. We are very proud to host the second annual Identity Management Day in partnership with the NCA. Lisa shared 2 statistics that show identity-related breaches continue to make the headlines every day. Attacks over the past year on SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline had massive repercussions, and yet neither attack was carried out via new techniques, but were the result of inadequate identity management practices. They also provided evidence that an identity-related breach can happen to an organization of any size and have significant impact to critical infrastructure and supply chains. Perhaps these latest events provide the motivation needed to make securing digital identities the top priority in every security program. But the responsibility does not fall solely on organizations. We are employees, partners, and consumers, and have the responsibility to protect all credentials equally. We all need to contribute to the security of our digital ecosystem. Identity security is everyone's responsibility. We have an amazing day planned. 12 exhibitors, 5 sessions with 22 speakers. And today we will cover a range of ideas and topics, including why haven't we had more progress in preventing identity-related breaches? And how can organizations and individuals come together to reduce risk? Putting a focus on SMBs, what are the areas of exposure in SMBs and MSPs? How can they use the Center for Internet Security Controls and some important tools to help become more secure and reduce the risk of a cyber attack? Then we move on to zero trust and the misconceptions about what it is and isn't, the role identity plays, and best practices and recommendations for achieving it with an identity-first mindset. So identity security is still neglected within most companies, and it rarely receives the same level of attention as threat and vulnerability management or application security or even firewalls. So what's missing? And we wrap up the conference with the future of identity and a discussion on emerging technologies, standards, and market trends such as decentralized identity, machine identity, and identity convergence. I encourage you to ask questions of our panels, and I hope you take away something from each of these sessions that can be applied to your personal and professional digital lives. In addition to these sessions, at 12 p.m. Mountain Time, there will be an interactive Twitter chat hosted by the NCA. Follow the hashtag to participate. We are also thrilled to have close to 200 identity management champions who have shown their support for Identity Management Day. They have already provided advice, and they are sharing best practices and even hosting virtual events. We encourage everyone to share their best practices and advice as we all work together to improve the security of our digital ecosystem. Follow these hashtags on LinkedIn and Twitter for more resources and more events. And lastly, we have established the Next Generation Fund to provide financial support to students on their path to an identity-smart cybersecurity career. The donations collected will be presented to Perscalis to provide skills training and access to employer networks to individuals often excluded from tech careers. There are over 2.7 million cybersecurity jobs unfilled. So I invite you to help fill the gap. So now I'd like to bring in my cohort in crime, Ravi Arukala. All of this couldn't have happened without the support of our Identity Management Day committee chair. Ravi is the VP of Analyst Relations and Customer Advocacy with IDSA member company Savient. Before I hand it over to Ravi to announce the winners of this year's Identity Management Day Awards, I want to give a special thanks to Ravi and the Savient team, specifically Devin Tackles, Christina Ferrari, and Kelly Hardy. Ravi, let's announce the winners.
Thank you, Jody. First of all, thanks to IDSA and NCA for co-hosting the Identity Management Day. And thanks to everyone that joined us today to celebrate Identity Management Day. We have a great lineup of sessions, as Julie mentioned today. I can't wait to get started, but before jumping into the sessions, we would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and to celebrate and to recognize the individuals and organizations who dedicate themselves to the best practices for promoting identity management and identity management in general. So we had 4 categories of awards this year, and there were several nominations, several strong nominations. Thanks to all those who submitted nominations, it is my honor to announce the winners today. The first category is Identity Management Project of the Year Enterprise, and the winner is Allstate. Allstate initiated a project called Manage My Access to transform how they handle user authentication and user access management, improve overall security posture and reliance on their legacy systems, and solve user experience issues. They followed identity management best practices from ideation to production and went live within 5 months. They achieved their goals, enhanced the user experience, and realized multi-million-dollar cost savings for Allstates. Congratulations to the Allstate team. The second category is Identity Management Project of the Year, SMB. And the winner is Westmark. Westmark, nominated by Enzoic, has modernized its password policy. Following NIST cybersecurity guidelines, Westmark transformed how password resets happen through continuous monitoring and appropriately enforcing password resets when needed. They strengthened security in a way, enhance the overall user experience and secure public sector contracts. So again, congratulations, Westmark team. The third category is Best Identity-Based Zero Trust Initiative. And the winner for this category is Adobe. Adobe launched a project called Zero Trust Enterprise Network, or also known as ZEN, to balance a pleasant user experience with security requirements for its employees in the era of remote work. It enables them to utilize certificate-based authentication without needing to remember complex passwords, and utilizes both identity management as a central identity provider and endpoint detection provider as well. With minimal investments, Zen allowed Adobe to achieve tighter security and an enhanced user experience, and reducing the need for VPN with simpler authentication methods. Congratulations again to the Adobe team. The fourth and final category is Identity Management Leader of the Year, and the winner is Raj Bhatia, Executive Director, Identity and Access Management at Comcast. Raj, nominated by Radiant Logic, initiated and led Comcast through an identity management transformation plan to serve its immediate needs, but also long-term strategic goals. Under his guidance, Comcast team built a national platform called My Comcast Access to help over 190,000 employees and centrally manage identities at scale to accommodate future growth and possible M&A activities. Raj has made it his passion to share his experiences and lessons learned in the identity management community by mentoring and speaking at various industry events. He sits on several customer advisory boards and is exceptionally forward-thinking and business-oriented while keeping identity management practices in place. He believes that identity management is about people and enabling businesses. Congratulations, Raj. Once again, congratulations to all the winners. We're glad for all the nominations, and we really recognize and appreciate your efforts. I will now hand it over to Sean Doby, Director of Services at Cymparis, to kick off today's session with a keynote panel, Preventing Identity-Related Attacks today. Take it over, Sean, and let's start the sessions.
Thanks, Ravi, and thanks to Julie for inviting me to participate today as well. In the movie Groundhog Day, Bill Murray is doomed to keep repeating a single day and all the events in it. In some ways, the cyber attacks we're seeing today are like Groundhog Day, except that the events are repeated at different organizations every day. Compromised credentials, local escalation, horizontal movement, domain-wide escalation, exfiltration, and finally encryption. The 2021 Verizon Data Breach Intelligence Report found that 85% of breaches involved human elements and 63% involved credentials. So though the title of this session is Preventing Identity-Related Attacks Today, a good subtitle might be, why are we still seeing the same kinds of attacks? Why are we not further along in preventing them? Joining me today to discuss this are Manish Gupta, the Director of Global Cybersecurity Services at Starbucks. His responsibility includes global strategy, product management, and operational execution for identity and access services. Manish is driving the adoption of passwordless and behavioral authentication solutions to save thousands of hours in labor and improve zero trust maturity at Starbucks. Manish is also a customer advisory board member at the Identity-Defined Security Alliance. Martin Kuppinger is founder and principal analyst at Kuppinger Cole Analysts, an industry analyst firm specializing in digital identity, IAM, and cybersecurity. He has been in the identity space for more than 30 years. Nowadays, he spends most of his time thinking about the trends and the future of identity and digital security and creating new research. Kuppinger Cole also runs the European Identity Conference, edition number 15, taking place May 10th to 13th in Berlin. Clint Maples is the Chief Information Security Officer at the global human resource firm Robert Half. He also serves as the president of the Information Security Leadership Foundation, which is a 501c3 not-for-profit volunteer organization that focuses on practitioner collaboration and the education, mentorship, and development of the next generation of information security leaders. He co-founded the Silicon Valley CISO Investments Group, where with 60 other CISOs, he helps fuel the next generation of cybersecurity innovation by identifying promising early-stage startups to invest in and advise. Tom Sheffield is Senior Director, Cybersecurity at Target, where he has spent the last 6 years working to modernize, simplify, and extend Target's IAM capabilities. A seasoned IT leader, Tom has spent most of the last 20 years leading enterprise IAM initiatives and teams for large multinational businesses. Tom's mission is to find that perfect balance between security and user experience through technology process optimization, and lots of empathy. A regular speaker, Tom enjoys talking about what's possible and value creation with anyone who will listen. Welcome to Identity Management Day, everyone. For the audience, as Julie had said earlier, feel free to ask questions of our panelists and we'll tee them up for the end of the sessions. So to kick off this discussion, let's talk a little bit about the problems that we're seeing today. Manish, we've seen that some of the biggest recent attacks could have been prevented with basic hygiene, removing access after an employee leaves, strong passwords, etc. Why do you think organizations haven't implemented the basics?
Thanks, Sean, for the question, and a very happy Identity Management Day to all the professionals out there. Happy to be here. Thank you, Julie and Ravi, for inviting us and for organizing this event. Sean, going to your question, I think to understand it at a fundamental level, I think we need to compare and contrast like two organizations here. So follow along here and be patient. I'll get to the point here. But let's talk about organization which we consider a good identity hygiene organization, someone who has strong multi-factor passwordless MFA implemented for all its users, someone who has privileged access implemented and rotating Windows administrator root passwords, and also has automated provisioning, but more importantly, deprovisioning implemented for its employees. And then contrast it with, say, a bad hygiene practice identity organization, which, as we know, like, and you mentioned in your question, right, they got compromised because of a password spray attack, because their email system was protected with basic user ID password single factor authentication. And then from there, they were able to send malicious documents to people. Someone opened it, they established command and control, and then expanded to servers because multiple servers were using the same administrator password. This is a story that we have seen repeat over and over again, and none of us are surprised, right? But what if I told you that both of these organizations, the one that we talked about is good and the other that we talked about is bad, are really one and the same? And that's where I think a lot of organizations are today. Not that they're not trying, but their efforts are not completely implemented, which leaves holes for bad guys to walk through. So in this case, what had happened is MFA was implemented, but was not protecting the email system yet. Automated provisioning, deprovisioning was implemented, but it was for employees only. It wasn't protecting the third-party users or contractors. Automated password reset and management for privileged access was protecting the inbuilt account, but not protecting other secondary accounts that were administrative access. So that's what leads to these issues. And I think the core of it is we are identity and cybersecurity professionals, but we are also technology professionals. And over the last several years, we have grown accustomed to developing what we call minimum viable products. And that works great for a customer scenario where we are trying to develop applications. But it's horrible for something where we are trying to protect things because it leaves enough holes with these 75%, 80% implementations that bad guys just walk through easily. And the automation that's available to them, for them to find these 25% or even 2% holes, it's really easy these days. So that's, I think, for me, is the crux of the problem. Not that we are not trying, but we are not 100%, and that leads to bad guys kind of walking through.
Tom, what do you have? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks for the invite today. I'm really excited to be here. As Manish mentioned, I think the gaps is really where we fall down. And as identity professionals, as security professionals, we all recognize that identity is the foundation of every security program. And we also recognize that that foundation must be built on those really solid governance principles. Manish touched on a few of them: enforcing MFA, requiring strong passwords, protecting shared accounts, deploying those robust lifecycle capabilities. All those are critical. I think the best thing that we can do as identity leaders is be the voice of security. We need to communicate to our cybersecurity partners, to our business partners, to our technology partners of the importance of all these foundational capabilities, and be the advocate for them and get them to understand why they're necessary, and then go start looking for them. Those holes exist because we don't have full visibility. So getting more visibility will definitely help close those gaps. And that's about prioritization, which I'm sure will come up multiple times today.
Clint, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. The group covered it pretty well. We've been trying to think about, I think, internally how we try and move the needle on this, right? And a lot of these projects are big, heavy lifts, and I almost wish we had a little bit more power as a buyer. Maybe the really large companies out there, it would be great to, because I think a lot of the security, maybe not a lot, we see movement in security requirements from customers or partners that you're working with when they kind of say, hey, if you want this deal, or if you want us to do business with you, you have to have some kind of minimum set of controls or certain things in place. I think as an industry, maybe as security professionals, we should start trying to get more identity security related items on that list. I think, if you look at maybe where we start with is cyber security insurance providers, when they come with their questionnaire to renew your policy every year. We just went through one of those, and a lot of those questionnaires were around DLP tools and encryption on laptops and other kind of controls that I think we've all been working on for a long time, and maybe hasn't really caught up with where we would like it to go.
Right. Martin, you have the hardest spot because you're after all these great people have already offered their comments, but I'm sure you'll have some angle on this, I'm sure.
Yeah. So first, welcome to everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. I don't worry much about having this spot. I'd like to bring up another point, which is at least relevant for, I would say, small, medium, and even mid-market organizations. And this is, we have a skills gap, and we still have a perception of this entire thing is horribly complex. And I think we also must invest in educating that many of the things we can do, specifically around identity security, take MFA, are by far not as complex anymore as they have been. And so, and we must also work on, I think, every vendor in simplifying security, simplifying identity security. So, but it's also, I think a lot of this is not really where we stand in the industry, but it's a perception thing.
So, Tom, all of this, we often talk about humans and the human aspect of this. Are humans the weakest link of all? As I said earlier, the Verizon report found that 85% of breaches involved human elements. Do we simply not have the capability to be secure enough, for example, managing password complexity, for the needs of identity systems as they exist today?
No, I think at the end of the day, there is a human at the end of the keyboard, the other end of the keyboard, right? That human's making decisions. Should I click this link? Should I open that document? Should I approve this access request or approve this review? At the end of the day, security is everyone's responsibility. It has to go from the top of the organization all the way through the entire organization. And at Target, we look at our first line of defense as our team members, and that they are critical layer of defense for us. For us, it's about educating ourselves on those threats, understanding what are the threats in the industry. We have a very strong threat intelligence organization. And then we test ourselves. And how do we identify and how are we able to identify and then report on that suspicious activity? All those things are ways that we implemented within Target to help ensure that we're able to understand what's going on and protect our users who are making those decisions every day. At the end of the day, it's up to us as identity and cybersecurity professionals, though, to do more than just education, more than just awareness. We have to do more in our space to help make it either really hard, if not impossible, to make the wrong decision, right? How do you make the right decision, the only decision possible? So we call that secure by design. And so our goal within that is to make sure that whatever somebody has a choice, the choice is always the right choice. And it's very hard, if not impossible, for them to make the wrong one. And we believe that will also help us to protect against those users making the wrong decisions.
Identity-related attacks are on the rise. Clint, can you share some of your thoughts on this and how you're preparing for it?
Yeah, I actually wanted to add on to Tom's comment there a little bit, because
sure.
as he was talking through that, I was just thinking through, like, yes, humans are the weakest link, but we've kind of made them that way because we've made using computer systems and authorization, things like that, so terrible, right? Like, oh, you've got to remember the 16-character password and then go find your phone to swipe the thing. And it, you know, and I'm thinking too, how other industries have solved this, or have sort of accepted that human nature is what it is. And if you have somebody in a construction site who's going to be working on an electrical line, you go and you lock out and tag out the panel, right? Because they know people will just come by and see the switch and turn it on, right? So you put some control in place where, like Tom was saying, you just can't do it, right? And you know, how do we make identity and authentication easier and more user friendly? So that, like you said, you can only make the right decisions. We've seen that internally, and I think the DBR sort of confirmed that as well. As we were looking at different types of, Sean, to your question, patterns in the attacks and breaches that you see, you know, we still see that system intrusions due to vulnerabilities, errors, and misconfigurations continues to be the most common attack pattern, but identity-focused attacks, while they're the second most common attack pattern, their frequency doubled from 2020 to 2021. So, you know, if this trend continues, I think in the next, you know, 2 to 3 years, they're going to take over the #1 spot. So I know we've been spending a lot of time thinking about how do we get in front of that. And like Tom was saying, how do we improve the way that we do security and authentication to make it easier for the users? Yeah.
Right. We're #1. We're #1. Yeah. Manish, what difficulties have you experienced at Starbucks implementing passwordless authentication?
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. So passwordless, as we know, is a very interesting topic, right? We are trying to train people who have been accustomed to one way and only one way of using computers, that's by starting off with a user ID password. And now trying to change that habit, even though it's a good change, right? It's good from a security perspective, but from a usability perspective, it's still a change. It's a significant change of behavior that all the users across the globe need to learn. So that, of course, is the biggest challenge. But for us as a large organization with a lot of users, I think scale of managing this kind of a change is also a difficulty that we had to work through. Other difficulties were around regulations and cultural differences. So for instance, if you go to Europe, you have to work through work council for any kind of significant process or system changes before you can implement those changes in European stores. Similarly, there might be scenarios where personal phone in different countries or states might have regulations that you cannot use personal phone for work or even for authentication purposes. And then in some cases, you might be trying to roll out a global push to accept kind of a solution for passwordless, but people in that country might be more familiar with using like a QR code scanning kind of a passwordless solution. So it's those kind of cultural differences, right? And then the last thing is really technological challenges that you face as you go through such a large implementation across the globe. We all know China is a unicorn in a lot of different ways. And with Google services not being available, the first challenge you run into is there's no Google Play Store for your app to be downloaded from. There's no Google push notification services for your push solution to work at, right? So you have to sidestep those things, work on publishing your app to 10 different phone manufacturer app stores versus one Google Central Play Store. The other technical challenges you could encounter is different environments that people work from, right? And some environments with thick walls or basements or plants where phone is not allowed for safety reasons, or wet environments where fingerprint readers are not an option. Those challenges kind of make you rethink your strategy and kind of walk away from a centralized solution for the globe. And then we all kind of ran into this. The biggest thing that happened in the last 2 years, the pandemic, forced everyone to put on a mask, and that completely made all the facial recognition biometric solutions useless. So we kind of have lived through some of these challenges, and come to the other side of this or tweaked it as we went along. But yeah, there is it's a significant undertaking.
Unintended consequences, unintended side effects, one of the many. So Martin, do you think that information security has fully embraced the concept of identity as a central pillar of modern security? Or is it still stuck in its beginnings of network or endpoint security?
I think we are in the middle of a transition, probably, because take just zero trust. Zero trust started as zero trust networks. Nowadays, when we look at zero trust, we start with identity, and I think this is the right place because it's the user accessing a device, going over the network to a system, to an application, to a cloud service, accessing data, all powered by software. So there are many pillars, but at the end, it's always a user or a digital identity that also can be a thing where it starts. And this notion, this understanding is growing. But I think it's still also a task of CISOs to rethink their organizations, to break down some of the traditional silos, to enforce more collaboration between the various parties within security and within identity. And so I think we are on a journey here, and I think this is where we need to continue to make progress, because this problem, and I think at the beginning of the intro, there was the hint on SolarWinds and other things. We've learned through this software supply chain attacks that this challenge is even bigger than many of us maybe had in mind, because it's not just identity and network and device. It's software, it's data, it's everything. And most of us surely haven't thought enough about data in this context.
I see. So we've spent the last 15 or 20 minutes talking about the problem. Let's kind of, let's explore how to make things better. And we've sort of hinted to some of this, but let's talk about what can be done about it. So Tom, the cyber criminal group Lapsus has made the news with several high-profile breaches, including NVIDIA, Samsung, Microsoft, and Okta. One of the unorthodox techniques they used is to recruit company employees to give up their credentials for payment. What strategies might you use to mitigate this kind of risk?
Yeah, I'll go back to my previous statement and just anchor back to security is everyone's responsibility, and just continue to invest in educating your team on the tactics of those cyber criminals. What are they doing? And then make sure your team's aware of them. Beyond the general training, we partner at Target very closely with our specialized areas within the business, our call centers, some of our finance people, just to make sure that they understand what's going on based on their role and their risk. The other interesting thing about Lapsus, though, is that if you think about it, it was a service provider to your service provider, right? So 3 degrees, 4 degrees of separation at this point to understand that, or to people have the visibility of that. If you think of security like a chain, we know we're only as good as that weakest link. But in this case, the Samsungs, the NVIDIAs probably didn't even know that they had a break in their chain or a compromise in their chain. So what do you do about that? How do you do that? And I think this is one of those areas where outsourcing is always a business decision, but it's also a good reminder that an in-house identity and authentication expertise is a key differentiator. If not suggesting that you wouldn't have those same opportunities for breach, by doing all of identity and access management by yourself, but it also gives you but I do recognize that it gives you visibility that in this case specifically you didn't have. And so there is some inherent value of having a strong identity team on your staff as part of your cybersecurity organization.
Well, to follow up on the human connection thread, Manish, at Starbucks, you're also working on adopting behavioral authentication. Can you share some examples of what your team is working on?
Sure, and I think it also kind of gels well with the insider threat aspect that you mentioned earlier. But behavioral authentication in general is a field that has come a long way in recent years. Of course, with other developments that are happening AI and ML space, right, which kind of have improved the algorithms level. We see behavioral patterns in several different areas, and it typically starts with establishing a baseline of user behavior. And then once you have that baseline, you could use it in multiple different ways. You could use it for initial authentication. You can use it to continuously keep refreshing user session to kind of give a perception of infinite session to the end user. You could also use it to detect anomalous activity and then kind of raise alarms or alerts to your security operations center so that they can deal with the situation. Or you could put additional friction in front of the user, right? So there's multiple different ways that you can use these behavioral patterns. And the patterns typically involve looking at users' typing pattern, their voice patterns, mouse movements, how they access applications, and which applications they use, what transactions they perform within those applications. And it's all kind of then just depends on how good of an analysis engine you have once you have collected the data. But it is very fruitful. It is very good from a business perspective. Like one good example we have is where we did not have an ability to use phones for some of the users to log in. We were able to get the authentication, strong authentication working using typing pattern, for instance, right? And it didn't require any external devices for that strong authentication to work. So there are those kind of good practical examples available nowadays, and it surely works, even though it might seem gimmicky on first look.
Yeah, behavioral authentication has the promise of having less friction for the user, less needless authentication, which, let's face it, even though we're identity professionals, most people that aren't identity professionals don't want to think about identity. They just want to get the job done. So let's talk about MFA. We've talked about MFA peripherally or indirectly in a number of ways, but it is really a core part of the conversation and protecting organizations today. It's widely recognized that it prevents the vast amount of account takeovers, but Martin, it's still far from widely adopted, isn't it?
It is far from being as wide as adopted as it should be. And when you take the statements of the CISA, so to speak, declaring a single factor authentication as insecure, then I think it's latest time to move forward to multi-factor authentication. And it goes a little bit back to what I said earlier. I think the perception of MFA is still that it's complex, that it's a challenging thing that you need to deploy. Spend a lot of time in doing it technically well to deploy the second factors, whatever it will be. But a lot has changed when you look at modern approaches to MFA, and frequently the smartphone acts as a factor, or the fingerprint reader you have on your smartphone. You have secure elements, secure storage for device bindings on various devices. So it's definitely simpler than it has been. And I think we really need to educate that. And this goes to a very important sentence. So we again and again here, we need to balance security and convenience, or security and accessibility. And I think latest when someone says security, balancing security, then the alarm bells should ring. Our thinking must be, how can we combine security and convenience? Because if we balance, then security goes up, convenience goes down. That is the problem of balance. Combination means we get both. And we are in a situation today where we can get both, where we have technologies for multi-factor authentication, for strong authentication, that are definitely more convenient than even a standard username password. And to be honest, whom of us is not annoyed by going to the web, doing purchases or whatever, or just looking at a hiking trail website, and is asked for registering with a username and a password? This is so outdated, and it is not convenient. We can do it better. We can do it more convenient. We can do it more secure. We can do both.
Well, it's interesting following in on MFA, and as you talked about different types of MFA, people tend to refer to MFA in a blanket as if it is a monolithic technology, but it's not. Their implementations are different from vendor to vendor, like how often a user receives an MFA challenge, and also by the MFA method, whether it's an OTP or an email or an SMS message or a push app or FIDO, or the list keeps going and growing. So there are a lot of different permutations for MFA out there. Clint, do you have any recommendations for MFA methods and types of implementations?
I haven't seen it yet. It might exist, but I would love to see and implement an MFA method where it's something you have to have a FIDO token, something like that, and it has to be connected to the device that you're authenticating from. So I think we have seen attacks where somebody will just, I think they call it MFA bombing. They'll just continue to attempt to authenticate, and your employee is getting, push notification after push notification at 2 a.m. Is this you? Like swipe yes, swipe yes, swipe yes. And they eventually, after the 30th or 40th one, they're just like, oh my gosh, I keep hitting no and it keeps coming. Maybe if I hit yes, I can go back to sleep, right? So I think if there were something, if that could be tied to coming from the actual device, you could block all of that, right? And if it's something that your employee has to physically have on them, then you would, I think, know much more definitively that it is one of your approved employees who's making the request. We have moved, I guess, in the realm of what is actually possible or what we're currently doing, moving quickly away from SMS-based authentication methods. I think there's just been too many examples recently that have shown that to be not as secure as we would like it to be, and the prevalence of application-based authentication methods that are more secure, whether it's Microsoft Authenticator or Okta or Duo, or there's a lot of different vendors out there that support that. So we're trying to kind of pass over SMS and go straight to that application authentication.
I would be interested to hear from the panel what their thoughts are on, is there a hierarchy of preference for MFA methods, given the fact that, as Manish said earlier, there are certain parts of the world where you simply can't use a method. But in a perfect world, what are your feelings of what you would prefer to see for authentication methods? Anyone?
Okay, then I'll take this. I think the authentication method is the wrong starting point. Where we should start is with adaptiveness. Authentication methods, even the ones which are either considered being safe or secure, or which are just popular, change frequently. And there is not the one method that fits to all use cases. I think our starting point must be, how can we support everything? How can we deal with every type of authenticator easily? We surely should not use every authenticator, but we should be able to do so, to be adaptive regarding the authenticators, and then being adaptive regarding what we allow. So what is the level of assurance of this type of authentication the authenticator can provide? What is the risk? What is the context of where this is happening? And if we put this together, we can be adaptive regarding, do we need something else? Which type of access do we allow? And I think this is our starting point, because then we can work with different types of authenticators and be more secure by taking risk and context into account.
Well, if we follow up on that, Tom, do you have any recommendations to help organizations deploy MFA?
Yeah, I think as a follow-up to that last question, I think let's just start with the basic premise that any MFA is better than no MFA. Microsoft has done some analysis, and they say that 99.9% of account compromise attacks could be addressed if we had MFA in place. So let's just start with any is better than none, and then from there, I think it really comes down to two things, and it all centers around risk. So the first thing you have to consider is visibility. You have to, it's really a prerequisite to being able to deploy MFA. And it goes back to the gaps comment that we started with Manish earlier today. You have to know where your endpoints are. You have to know where your external endpoints are. You have to know where your vulnerabilities are. Think of them as either your network drops, your machines, your application exposing the internet, whatever they are. If you don't know they're there, you can't protect them. And that's where those gaps come from. And then once you know where they are, once you know what they are, now you're talking about risk and prioritization. And so now you're going to start mapping the MFA based on the risk. And so if I'm thinking about a retail situation where the risk is at one of my guests' accounts being taken over, maybe SMS is enough. If I've got a server exposed to the internet, maybe a FIDO key is the only thing that would be allowed to allow that user to allow a remote user to log into that server. So you have to assess the risk and then prioritize based on that risk. It's going to be hard to roll out MFA, so you have to make sure that you're doing this in phases. So understand what the risk is, and then attack each phase by the risk level. And then along the way, what you're going to find is a lot of complexity. Most of us have grown organically over multiple years. There's very few greenfield opportunities that exist today. So you're going to have a lot of complexity, a lot of technical debt in your environment. So along the way, part of your effort should be aligned to simplifying your environment. As you simplify it, you're going to reduce your attack surface. And as you simplify it, now you've got the opportunity to tie the new solutions to open standards. Those open standards give you the opportunity to have interoperability and cross-platform adoption, both of which will then speed up your journey in the later phases.
So we have a couple of questions from the audience. Let me, and I know we have some interest from the panel here on these questions. So let me ask a question here. So from one of our attendees, often cloud DevOps departments sidestep an organization's IAM practice by remaining siloed. How do you propose to help change this pattern? Who wants to take this?
If no one wants, I do. And you can follow up on that. I think that is an obligation for the CIO. Because we have the DevOps teams, we have the security teams, we have the infrastructure teams, and all are involved in that. So if something is developed, it must be secured, it must run on a cloud infrastructure, typically infrastructure as a service, and you need to bring these together. And the DevOps people have their job to do. And that is not writing code for infrastructure as code to secure the environment. That's what security people can do better. And infrastructure people can better deal with ensuring that the infrastructure is is elastic enough for the use case. And so I don't think that we can say we just build one team. That will not work. But we must enforce that people talk with each other, that we have the interfaces, that we have the communication between these teams. And this is a #1 CIO job.
I have a friend of mine recently said that for DevOps to code security in their applications is a little bit like eating spinach. Everybody knows that it's good for you, but people tend not to do it. Next question. How do you walk the, and we've discussed this a little bit, but let's see if we have any other aspects to it. How do you walk the line between balancing security and accessibility? Sometimes the most secure policies are not practical because they create a barrier to engagement and productivity. It often feels like a balance. How do you try to find this balance?
Yeah, I'll take that. So I think like Martin addressed it very well earlier, right? I don't think it's a balance. I think especially as we are moving towards say FIDO 2 and other advanced methods of authentication, we are seeing more and more where we can have both, right? And it works well for the users, right? So as we take the example of passwordless solutions, it has almost got down to already where a single tap gets you in to whatever you're trying to do. It's very low friction, and it is a strong multi-factor biometric-based authentication in most cases. So I think that balance thing is there. It's real, but at the same time, what we're seeing with the new advancements is it's possible to kind of have both and still make it user-friendly, right? So I think that's the first point. But the other is, I think the other techniques you can use is, and kind of going a little back to the earlier question on DevOps, right? You could make things easier for your user to adapt. Like in an enterprise context, for instance, if you want people to onboard to your centralized authentication solution, maybe you offer them self-service so that they can create the federation integration themselves and test it and can promote it to production without having to talk to someone, right? Unless it's a very difficult, complex integration. Most of the time, you would be able to get success that way, and your developers will love you. Similar thing for like if you want them to integrate and store credentials in a privileged access solution. Expose the APIs, make it well known, make it published so that developers don't think twice about it, and actually they are doing less code by storing the password in a secure vault because you have exposed the APIs. They would love you, right? And they would always want to do it versus having to write the code every time to store a password in a config file and then retrieve it, which is going to be a lot more work for them. So I think there is a balancing aspect, but then there is also how do you kind of do it in a way that you make it easy for your users and they actually want to adapt.
Yeah, we use the word empathy a lot within our identity team here at Target, and it really comes down to knowing what your customers, right? We're a product organization, so knowing what your customers use. So my customers are engineers and other product teams in the Target tech environment. So understanding how they work, we have a team of full stack engineers. My identity management team of today is very different than it was 5 to 10 years ago. Right, we are looking for full stack engineers, developers. We want people who understand what is the life of a developer in the product team. If you are using the same tools that they are and you don't like them, imagine what those teams faced. So coming from that place of empathy, knowing your business, coming from that place of empathy allows you to really build solutions that work for them. And now you're starting to move from enforcing and policing, which is sort of traditional security, to enabling. And really that's the value proposition that we all bring. It's our expertise, but it's our ability to use that expertise to enable the business to solve problems, to enable the business to do different things or do things differently. And that's where you start creating the value. And that's where those relationships blossom and shine. And that hopefully over time will take away those siloed organizations, right? Because you are not a pain to them, you're an enabler for them. And if you can become an enabler, you've got a much better opportunity to get them to latch on your services and be a partner going forward.
Well, as a follow-up on that, Tom, there's another question for the audience if maybe you want to take it. For those that have adopted FIDO or WebAuthn, how challenging was the user adoption among the non-technical population?
Yeah, so we rolled out a FIDO authentication experience across both our workstations. So think of Touch ID on or Windows Hello, but also a FIDO web experience for our web applications. We rolled that out on World Password Day last year, and since then we've had over 300,000 FIDO registrations across our enterprise. So these are enterprise users in our HQ environment, in our stores. Target had been investing for multiple years on laptops equipped with fingerprint readers across both platforms. Obviously, with Apple's joining of the FIDO Alliance a couple of years ago, that opened up the iOS population. Android was there as of a few years. So now you've got really the capability across platforms and the most common platforms that our users use. And so adoption has been relatively easy for us. We did a lot of communication, a lot of campaigns to sell the value of it. It is about simplicity. It is about security. It's about ease of use for them. And once we were able to get them to understand what the value was, it's actually gone better than we expected overall.
So final question before we wrap up, for everybody, what actionable advice do you have to help organizations not be the next victim of an identity-related attack? Let's start with Manish.
Sure. I think that's a great last question, Sean. So I'll kind of introduce a word here. It comes from 19th century French art context called déclassé. And what it means is something kind of falling out of style or falling out of taste due to changes in the environment. I think we are at a similar cusp here in terms of identity, where we have good availability of passwordless solutions. Technology is there, and just like Tom mentioned, we are seeing big success because big corporations and vendors are starting to adopt these and build it right from get-go. So given that kind of environment today, I think we have to walk away today by making a start of a movement where passwords are considered declassified. And we kind of make that start of the movement and expect our identity professionals, consumers, partners to start demanding, building, and implementing passwordless solutions. And that would be kind of the start of the new, more secure identity-defined security world.
Tom.
I would say it begins with knowing your business, right? Knowing the threats, knowing the risks, knowing your customers, knowing your users. And then once you know your business, really understanding those risks that are specific to your organization versus the current headlines. So as much as I love talking about zero trust and passwordless, recognize that we're all on a journey. And so for some people, you have to ignore that hype right now and focus on where you are on your journey and where your risks are today, and then implement and prioritize against your risk and your level of risk, and then move forward from there. And at some point, zero trust or passwordless may be the solution to get to. But if you're not there today, you're going to do yourself a disservice if you don't close the immediate risks in front of you.
Martin, how about you?
Yeah, so I think there were two great answers. MFA passwordless, understand your risk. I think the other is have a plan. So identity and identity security is complex. There are many elements in that. I think you need to understand where you want to move, to have a broader picture, and to use that to understand what do you have, what are the biggest risks, what are the biggest gaps, and how to fill it, in which order to prioritize the various initiatives. So things like we created this as we call it identity fabric. There's a ton of material on our website, but doing something like that, really creating a bigger picture and a plan you execute on. And it's a program, it's a journey.
Thank you, Martin. Clint, we only have a minute, so we'll count on your succinctness.
Yeah, MFA, all the things, and get rid of system passwords. Go to just-in-time authentication. No more system application passwords, stored credentials, that kind of thing. Just-in-time access, just when you need it.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for helping me stay on time, and thanks for a great panel. Very interesting discussion. And Ravi, I will put it over to you.